Our message is really clear and straightforward. We need ICE out of Minnesota. They are not making us more safe. As the tragic killing this morning, as people saw it viscerally on that video, shows us, they are making us less safe.
Political junkies, I don't usually hit you with a podcast on Monday, but the additional murder in Minneapolis over the weekend has pushed me to this. This is an emergency episode of the Political Junkie podcast, in which I will be joined by Michael Kazin, a prize-winning scholar and professor of history at Georgetown University. Michael is an expert in American social movements and politics. His most recent book is What It Took to Win: A History of the Democratic Party. You can find a link to that on the Substack if you navigate over there. It's a wonderful book, and it will prepare you to talk to anyone on X about why today's Democratic Party is not yesterday's Democratic Party. Michael has written extensively about the American peace movement, the progressive movement, populist movements, and the New Left. You can see all of his work on a link I'm going to provide on the Substack. But today he is here to talk about what's going on in Minneapolis, the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and how Minneapolis has organized to try to limit the damage that the Trump administration is doing in their beautiful city. Michael Kazin, welcome to our show.
Great to be here, Claire.
Michael, can you tell us a little something about the history of Minneapolis and why we shouldn't be surprised that the Twin Cities has been able to organize as thoroughly as they have?
Well, I must say I'm not a Minnesota historian, though I know people who are, and I've taught there. The Gilda Lehrman Institute had me up there once to do a week-long seminar for high school teachers. Minnesota is an interesting place. It was settled primarily by Scandinavian immigrants after the Native Americans were, kicked out and massacred, and they had a pretty strong union movement beginning in the mid-1930s. They had a general strike there in 1934, which was led by a Trotskyist breakaway from the Communist Party. Then they had a very strong Democratic Party, which combined a third party, a former Labor Party, with the Democratic Party. So the formal name of the Minnesota Democratic Party is the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And Hubert Humphrey, when he was a very progressive figure before he became a supporter of the Vietnam War, was the mayor of Minneapolis. He gave a famous speech at the 1948 Democratic Convention where he argued basically Democrats had to give up their racist past and embrace human rights and a civil rights plank in the platform of the party. And in the 1960s, I knew some people there. I went to, when I was in the New Left, I went to the Twin Cities a couple of times. And they had a very strong labor-based left, which was not true of the New Left in many parts of the country. And of course, they've had a large influx of immigrants, as many states did after 1965, after the immigration laws were changed. Somalian immigrants, I'm not sure why so many settled in Minneapolis. I don't know that, but obviously a lot have. And that, of course, became very controversial, even before Trump won his second term. But there's also a very good neighborhood network, especially in South Minneapolis, where the two killings took place of Petty and Good, and a lot of people who were mobilized around Walz's gubernatorial campaigns, organized around unionization drives in the service trades, organized also to defend immigrant rights. They've gotten together. One of the things that makes it unusual, I think, in this sense, as a big city, is that it's predominantly white big city. And one of the things we can talk about, one of the things I hate to have to acknowledge this, but I think it's out there, is one of the reasons why these two killings have gotten so much attention is because both people were white American citizens. Right. And there's been, of course, ICE has mostly been targeting people who are not white. But the fact that you have this support network for a lot of people being targeted by ICE and the support network, the people out front there mostly are white American citizens because they're safer. Usually they thought they were safer from being harassed by ICE. So I think that sort of shows you that this predominantly white area also has a very strong multicultural left. And so again, I don't know a lot about the internal dynamics of that movement, but I do have the daughter of good friends of ours is a doctor in one of the big public hospitals there, and she has been sending out emails about all the really quite incredible help that progressive figures in this movement have been giving to immigrants who they feel are under attack, bringing them food, doing childcare, doctors doing house calls, which most doctors don't do anymore, and so forth. So it's really a community-wide support network and uprising, which is one of the reasons why I think ICE people freaked out, because they were being faced by opposition with whistles, with calls, with cars following them everywhere they went. And it doesn't obviously excuse what they did in any way, but it might help to explain why some of the ICE people felt under attack in that sense.
Yeah.
Under nonviolent attack, but nevertheless under attack.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I just want to tack on to what you're saying here. I think the reason there are so many Somali immigrants, and also Hmong immigrants, the Hmong are a big population, is that the church networks, particularly the Lutherans in the Twin Cities, were very, very active in bringing immigrants to the Twin Cities and settling them. And so we have these religious networks as well, which we saw in action the other day when all of the priests and rabbis were lined up praying and being hauled away one by one by ICE. I think the other thing I'm reading is that some of the networks, and you see this in social movements, I'd love to get your view on this, Michael. Some of the networks that are in place have been in place since the George Floyd demonstrations. And so it's many of those people who are leading the trainings. And as I understand it, people in Minneapolis have been training for almost a year for this moment. They have been getting ready, and it is the George Floyd activists who have been at the center of it. Can you talk to us a little bit about how social movements sort of bleed into one another like that?
No, that's a really good point. I mean, every large social movement in U.S. history and those in other countries' histories as well brings in different groups, diverse in all kinds of ways, ideologically and otherwise, who have their own issues they most care about, but they also understand the need to find solidarity, make connections with other single issue groups to support each other on the issues that really matter. And that was true with the Black Freedom Movement, that it got going partly from people who had fought for immigrant rights before in the 1930s and 40s, and then joined in with the fight for civil rights in the South and the North as well. It includes people who, as you say, come from churches, especially the more liberal churches, which have not been doing very well in recent decades, actually, but they still exist, especially the fact that these are Scandinavians is important too, because Scandinavia has this tradition of social democracy, and that's true north of the border too, in Saskatchewan, which had a very strong social democratic party, which ran it for many years. So I think social movements in the upper Midwest, really, people don't know about them so much, because not many people read Minneapolis newspapers or go there for vacations or whatever. But it's in many ways has a rich history of social activism, as rich as that in Berkeley or New York City or other places people think about. But as you said, Claire, social movements are generative. They find ways to combine different enthusiasms behind, especially when when one of them is under attack, and that's really what's happened here. And also something else, and I'm glad you mentioned the connection to the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, because social movements are never spontaneous. There's a myth out there that historians know is a myth that somehow people just get angry and they begin to start acting, and they've never done anything before, but this is they feel this is really a time when they have to do something. That is hardly ever true. People who know how to organize movements have organized them before. And the best organizers of social movements are people who've organized other social movements in the past. Saul Alinsky, who was a leader of community organizing back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, used to say, if you want to organize a community, find people who know how to organize. You're not going to invent organizers. Organizers have to spend years, often decades, learning to be organizers, and those are the most effective organizers in most cases.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned the fact that ICE did not expect this kind of resistance in Minneapolis, which seems kind of ludicrous from our perspective because we know the things we know about Minneapolis. But it doesn't seem ludicrous from the perspective of the Trump administration, which does all kinds of things without really planning them or researching them or anything like that. Nevertheless, it appears that this may have been a tremendous misstep on the part of the Trump administration, that even Republicans don't like seeing white Americans gunned down in cold blood. And both of these murders were really quite horrifying. Alex Pretty was on the ground. He had apparently been carrying a weapon, but he had been disarmed. He was surrounded by 4 or 5 ICE officers, and somebody pumped 10 bullets into his back. Renee Good was shot in the face, and then she was shot 2 more times for good measure. I'm thinking about Kent State and the ways in which those students, white students being killed at Kent State, really sort of was a shift in how the general public understood the Vietnam War. Do you think that this is going to be some kind of pivot point for Americans?
We'll have to see. I mean, by the time that the Kent State shootings took place in May 1970, most Americans already turned against the Vietnam War. And the Nixon administration was already saying, we're going to bring American troops out. They were bringing American troops out slowly. The South Vietnamese army was taking out more that weren't to the fighting and the deaths. Bombing North Vietnam was still going on, but nevertheless, the war was beginning to wind down for the U.S. And then Nixon invaded Cambodia, and that ramped it up very quickly, but not in a lasting way. The difference now is that until these current raids and obviously unsuccessful, politically unpopular killings, Trump's ratings on immigration were higher than his ratings on the other issues that he ran on. And still, I think most Americans, including some Democrats, but certainly almost all Republicans and many independents, think that, undocumented illegal immigration went too far, that Biden opened the border too much to millions of people, and they wanted something done. And so it was based on that expectation and that popularity that Trump, with the aid of people like Stephen Miller, who are just I'm not sure what to call him.
He's a horrible person. He's just a horrible person.
But he loves tyranny. It's not just he's terrible.
Yes.
He really likes the idea of pushing people around. Anyway, but I think what's happening now, whether it's going to be a pivot point or not, we'll have to see. As you've probably seen this morning, Trump backed away from the rhetoric he'd been using. He actually called Governor Walz, and he said he had a good conversation with the governor. He called a left-wing loony, a radical leftist, unhinged, et cetera, and he also sent one of the evidently more trusted people in the deportation machine, this guy Tom Homan's so-called border czar, to run things there. So Kristi Noem was sort of out of it, at least for the time being. So if no more people are killed, if ICE backs away in Minnesota and doesn't do similar kinds of things in other cities, then it's possible that Trump will regain at least some more of the popularity that he's lost because of this. And the fact that Republicans, some of them at least, are not denouncing Trump, but at least questioning what's happened. They are not taking the lead from Stephen Miller. That also shows that Trump is not a political idiot here. He knows he's in trouble on this issue.
Yeah, he's not a political idiot, but he has such a short attention span. And, they have dug themselves into quite a hole here, which is a somewhat bloodless way to describe an extremely bloody and abusive and bullying and damaging conflict. But I'm also thinking about another phrase from the Vietnam War, which was the credibility gap. Journalists invented this to talk about the dissonance between what they actually observed in Vietnam and what they were actually being told in press briefings. And we have the reemergence of the credibility gap, but almost on the level of farce now. And we have been used to propaganda being spread, particularly on social media, but also in the news, by members of the administration who just get up in press conferences and lie about everything. But in relation to what's happening in Minneapolis, we have members of the administration spinning narratives that are obviously false. Is this going to break through in any way to key voter groups that they're not only doing these things, they're not taking any responsibility for them in any way that we recognize?
I hate to say it, Claire, but I think Americans are less troubled by lying from on top than they used to be. I think we're so divided into our camps on both sides that Republicans, as long as the lying doesn't lead to chaos, like we've seen in Minneapolis, they're going to stay with Trump. And Democrats, of course, are not going to give Trump credit for anything, even if they might agree with one or two things that he's doing.
Right.
So I think that was different, because during the Vietnam War, there were Republicans who turned against Nixon. There were Republicans who, of course, joined in wanting to get Nixon out of office during the Watergate scandal. And if all that was happening now, of course, you would think after January 6th that Republicans would have said, well, I'm not going to support this guy again. But of course, they nominated him again, and he won by a larger margin than he won in 2016. And he won the popular vote, at least a plurality of the popular vote. So I wish the credibility gap mattered, but I think a lot of people who like Trump, or at least voted for him, at least, whether they liked him or not, are willing to say, I'll stick with him as long as he doesn't mess up my life and the lives of people I know, because all politicians lie, all politicians are corrupt. So the level of cynicism, I think, in this country about politics is higher than it was 50, 60 years ago. I wish that weren't true, but I'm afraid it is. And so you'll have to see. But I think in the end, only more... can I use the four-letter word? Only more fuck-ups on the part of Trump and his people will turn enough people against him. But look, his popularity is only 40%, by most 40 to 41%. So he's already lost about a quarter of the people who voted for him, if the polls are correct. That's a lot in only a year.
And Newsweek just did a poll, and I don't know whether Newsweek's polls are very accurate, but what they say is between last week and this week, 20% of Republicans now say that ICE should be abolished, that it is too broken and too corrupt and undisciplined, and that it should just be abolished, which is actually kind of astonishing. And, just to remind our listeners, it's not just Republicans and Democrats. It's really the independents who are running the show here. But to have 20% of Republicans be actually turning on a police agency strikes me as important.
How
about
that's
you?
Right. Yeah, and that's why he's making this U-turn away from saying that these killings were the fault of those who were killed. He's not peddling the outrageous lies anymore. He's already saying, well, let's get this under control. Let's have local police and federal authorities cooperate together. He's sounding like very un-Trumpian Trump. He won't keep that up, because that's not his personality. And we'll have to see. I think Ironically, one of the things that has probably made a lot of even Republicans less enamored of this policy in immigration is that Trump has pretty much sealed the southern border. Hardly anybody's coming across the border now, and that was where Biden really got in trouble, and other Democrats got in trouble because they seemed like the southern border was a problem. But I don't think even a lot of Republicans think, well, Minneapolis, is that really the problem here? They worried more about Texas and Florida and certain California. So that might be working into it as well.
Yeah. And of course, ICE is currently surging in Lewiston, Maine. As I understand it, busloads of people from Portland have gone to Lewiston to demonstrate and get in the way. So it also seems...
Actually, that's the other thing. That's the other thing that people should talk about more. There are far, far, far more undocumented immigrants in Texas and Florida and Arizona,
right?
Near the southern border than there are in Maine or Minnesota. I think it's 130,000 undocumented immigrants in Minnesota, 5 million or something like that in Texas. So but clearly, you're not going to send ICE into Dallas. You're not going to send ICE into Houston. You're not going to send ICE into places that where states Republicans run. So.
Right. And of course, if you go on X, what MAGA influencers are saying is, well, we don't have to because the governors there are taking care of the problem, which is, of course, not true. Michael, we only have a minute here, but what should Democrats be doing right now? And I'm talking about the party, I'm talking about the voters, although the voters seem to be doing just fine at getting organized and getting trained and getting out there. But what should the Democratic Party be doing right now, both to try to stop this madness and to use it to make the pivot to the midterm elections?
I think Democrats have to have an immigration policy which makes sense. It can't be a lot of voters who aren't Democrats think Democrats just want anybody to come in who wants to. That's not true, but that can't be their policy. I think comprehensive immigration reform, the kind of thing that George W. Bush supported, that Barack Obama supported, where there's a path for legalization for people already here, undocumented people already here, and you do have a much tougher border patrol. That's fine. Keep people from coming in illegally. That to me made sense at the time when it was first proposed as a bipartisan idea. I think it still makes sense today. And most Americans supported it then. I think if you put it out there and communicated it well, they'd still support it today. So I think immigration has always been a problem, in American politics when there's mass immigration. As you know, Claire, as a historian of the United States, the New Deal era from the 1930s up until the 1960s, mid-60s, was a time when very few immigrants were coming to the country, except those from south of the border, but very few from other parts of the world, and even not that many from south of the border. And that is a time when we had some of the most progressive policies, economically at least, in American history, and there was this large working class movement. I think you can't have a nation state without controlled borders. At the same time, you can't have a decent society unless you have a moral position towards people who want to come here and who would be good citizens if you allowed them to become citizens. So I think that combination is important for Democrats to support.
Michael, thank you so much for your time, and solidarity forever.
You too. Bye-bye.
And that's it for today's show. Thanks for hanging out with us. Share this podcast with a friend who loves history, politics, and smart conversation. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, X, TikTok, and Instagram. Go to the Political Junkie Substack at clairepotter.substack.com for show notes, more episodes, to leave a comment or question, to subscribe for free, or to support our work for as little as $5 a month. You can also subscribe for free by searching for us on your favorite platform. If you do, please leave a rating and a comment so that other listeners can find us. Our podcast is supported by the New School for Social Research and by paying subscribers. Political Junkie is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Claire Potter. Today's theme is Last Train to Elowan by Alceiver Lake. You can find their work and all the talented artists we feature on these episodes on Soundstripe. That's all for now. See you at the end of the week.